Happy, clappy, social media loving, slippy McSlip face. If you're confused, these were actual phrases said by the commentators during the race today. And if you don't believe me, you should go rewatch the race because this race was definitely worth a rewatch. I actually watched this race twice. I woke up at like 2 a.m. to watch it and stopped about halfway because I was falling asleep. And I thought I was gonna wake up in the morning to a podium from Lance Stroll. Instead, I woke up to perhaps the most interesting race since Monza 2020. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that my website dropped last week, so you should go check that out. It has all of my blog posts as well as women in motorsport highlights and other things. Without further ado, let's just get into it because we have a lot of ground to cover. So the track is 3.3 miles long. There were 2 DRS zones which weren't really even used. They only really utilized DRS for the race around like lap 30. The first time they used this track was in 2005 and the last time they used it was in 2011. Turn 8, very important part of this entire track. It is a quadruple apex. You're pulling about 4 to 5 Gs for a couple of seconds. I thought the track was sort of comparable to Portimao simply because of the elevation changes. So this race, I think the best way to classify was a mixture of what Nürburgring could have looked like and Portimao. And I say that because everybody was so concerned with the weather for Nürburgring, and then the weather kind of cleared up a bit during the actual race. But in today's race, this was not the case. This track was newly resurfaced only like 10 or so days before the actual GP, which was not the way to go. This was an awesome mix of podium finishers. We had P3 was Sebastian Vettel after a very long time. P2 was Sergio Perez, and P1 was Lewis Hamilton, now 7-time world champion. I spent a lot of time over the weekend becoming a physicist and understanding how tires work on different conditions, especially the intermediates. No, I don't know why I keep doing this. Especially the inters and the wets. I've narrowed it down to explain it as simple as possible so you understand exactly what we're dealing with. Istanbul's forecast for Saturday was around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. A lot of people started on just the regular slick tires. It's worth noting that Pirelli did pick the hardest of the compounds for this week, which itself again was another terrible move. The track was newly resurfaced. There was very limited grip on the track, not enough rubber. There weren't any feeder series doing any races around this weekend at the same time, so the track was comparable to an ice skating rink. Combine that with the wet weather, the rain, makes for a lot of aquaplaning. This decision could exemplify a driver's problems even without rain. Now you add rain into the formula and suddenly it's just chaotic. Free practice, I don't remember which one it was, but one of them there was a red flag brought out because there was just limited visibility and all these drivers just couldn't figure out what to do. The issue is that even with a layer of water on top of the track, there's still no grip underneath the track, which makes using the inters and the wets even more difficult. It played to certain drivers' advantages in certain situations. For example, Red Bull did really well on the full wets, and then you had teams like the Racing Points, which were really well on the intermediates. This is because there's just the various factors that just go into a car as a whole, like the fuel load, the chassis, aero package, amongst other factors. It's hard to predict how a certain car will perform in these situations. Like Mercedes, for example, definitely not performing where they needed to be during the qualifyings and the free practices. You compare that with the Alphas, which somehow ended up in Q3. There was just no possible way for teams to predict, oh, this tire is going to work best for us. If you're looking at this picture here, you can see that the tread patterns on these tires are pretty much designed to remove as much water as possible from the track surface. The intermediate tires, which are on the left, these can evacuate up to 30 liters of water per second at 300 kilometers per hour, while the wets on the right can evacuate up to 65 liters of water per second. The intermediate tires also have fewer grooves than the wet tires. This is pretty much because the intermediate tires are suited for partially wet conditions. They're kind of a mixture of just slick tires and the full wet. So essentially this is like the best tire to use if the track is like partially dry and partially wet. You also have to consider how much temperature plays into this as well. It's track temperature, tire, grip, weather. During qualifying, we saw how Lance Stroll took pole position, was on the intermediates And then you saw Max Verstappen's team basically just be like, oh my god, we need to put the intermediates on right now, even though he was doing pretty well on the full wets. When you have extremely unique situations like this one, it's really, really hard to predict how things will play out. And if you're Lewis Hamilton, it'll work out for you no matter what. Lewis Hamilton, known for preserving his tires. I'll talk more about it when we get to Lewis Hamilton later in this video, but just keep in mind that Hamilton did what a lot of drivers couldn't, and I think that single-handedly allowed him to take home his title today. Sebastian Vettel and Sergio Perez, I don't think anybody really thought, oh, Seb, he's gonna be on the podium tomorrow. And it's kind of sad because I think everybody just assumed, oh, you know, because he's been out-qualified by his teammate every single race so far, has never been higher than 10th in the last 7 races. Everybody just kind of assumed, okay, well, not really gonna be super great there, but Ferrari actually did pretty well. So Sebastian had a very, very amazing start, just right behind Sergio Perez. Definitely a huge deal because first of all, we don't even see Ferraris up in the grid that high, and for some reason in this particular race we did. He was only about 8.1 seconds off of the leader, Stroll, by lap 29, and then Vettel pitted again around lap 34. So this is where things kind of come into play, is when you consider how Sebastian pretty much got very lucky last minute because of Leclerc's mishap. To understand how Seb ended up on the podium, we need to take a look at how Leclerc ended up where he did. So Leclerc was P4 around lap 41. Then he was around P3 with only like 5 laps left to go in the entire race. Think about it, that's like lap 53, you're P3. You would think all I have to do is just maintain this and I could be on the podium, but no. Like at this point, it was just looking like a Hamilton, Perez, Leclerc podium. But then Charles Leclerc tries to overtake Sergio Perez and he's running at P2 for like a few seconds until he has a lockup. Perez utilizes the slipstream on the other side and then Vettel follows in pursuit. Before you know it, Charles Leclerc has dropped from P2 to P4. Now the Sergio Stroll situation is a little bit suspect, I would say. Stroll was on pole. Perez also had an amazing start to the race, took off right behind Stroll. Stroll was ahead of Perez by about 10 seconds, I want to say, around lap 13. This turned into 5 seconds by lap 22, 3.8 seconds by lap 24, and then 2 seconds by lap 33. So it was obvious that Stroll was losing time on his tires.
Hi everyone, so I did a bit of analysis on this section before waking up today morning to a couple of announcements from Racing Point via Twitter. So they realized post-race that Lance Stroll's car had a mechanical issue after one of the strakes from the front wing ended up pretty much just lodging itself in a way that caused Stroll to lose a great amount of downforce on the front. So this could be attributed to the fact that Lance significantly slowed down as the race went on, and it was not his fault, and I just wanted to clarify.
The last person I want to talk about is none other than Lewis Hamilton, because I think we all had the same question. How did this man go from 6th to taking P1? Because as we know, neither of the Mercedes were doing really well during either of the free practices or qualifying. They qualified, I think it was P9 for Valtteri and P6 for Hamilton. Where did Hamilton find his mojo? The best way to analyze this situation is by breaking it down from the beginning. So the opening lap, Daniel Ricciardo tries to avoid Hamilton, ends up tagging his teammate Esteban Ocon, who causes Valtteri to then spin out. So at that point, Valtteri begins his spiral, literally and metaphorically, into pretty much losing this race. So Hamilton does have several issues finding his grip. This was very prominent in lap 1, where Albon overtakes him, and then Hamilton is P8 by lap 9. But here's where it starts to look up for Hamilton. By lap 25, there's about 16 seconds between him and the leader. By lap 32, there's about 10 seconds between him and the leader. Vettel pits around lap 34, at which point Hamilton now moves up into P4. Then Albon spins, and now Hamilton is P3. This is when he comes onto his radio and says, "Don't box me." That means he knows what he's doing. So after Stroll finally pits, Perez is P1, and now Hamilton is P2. Hamilton officially takes the lead on lap 37 using DRS. I took note of this and I made sure to discuss it with you guys, and that is the age of Hamilton's tires. So Hamilton's tires were about 34 laps old by lap 40, and they're about 46 laps old by lap 52, which is 6 laps before the race is over, which means Hamilton finished this race with tires the age of 52 laps. That's literally pretty much the entire race. He clearly made the right call not to pit. And I think, again, this goes back to a couple of points I expressed in my video. It's not that everybody else isn't fast, it's just that Hamilton is smart, and he's also an expert at managing his tires. So I think this is what it comes down to. When you're a seasoned driver like Lewis Hamilton, you're constantly paying attention to things that are 10 steps ahead of you. So it's not just what's going on right now, it's what's going to happen. And I remember, like, he asked his engineer at one point, he was like, I see a big cloud, like, is it gonna rain? It's things like that that I think put Hamilton above the average F1 driver. I think the best way to compare what I'm trying to explain is, like, for example, Ayrton Senna, legendary driver, and the thing that everybody notes about him is the fact that he had the best intuition when it came to car handling. He knew exactly what the car would do for him. And I think that sort of mentality is kind of what Lewis Hamilton tries to live by, which is why he knows his car so well. And yeah, sometimes it can sound annoying to some people when he's constantly coming on the radio and asking questions and saying things, but really, he's really only helping himself and his team at the end of the day. He did mention that he didn't want to make the same mistake that happened in China in 2007 when a pit stop ruined his chances at a title. No, I think it's also constantly being able to reflect on the past and to always be learning. And something that I found really adorable was during the actual coverage. So Karun Chandok, one of the reporters, former driver, comes on and he says, you have to be good to even race in Formula One. You have to be very good to win races. But unquestionably, Lewis is one of the greats. And I agree. I'm really excited to see what comes of him, even after he retires. Now, I want to know what he's up to. I can see him mentoring people, being a coach. I can't wait to see how that plays out. I thought Lance Stroll, obviously, and Alex Albon are worth mentioning and highlighting. So Lance Stroll, all my other videos, I talked about how he had bad luck. This just canceled all of that. He is the 5th youngest pole sitter in history. The fact that it was Lance Stroll, I think it says a lot about his talent. We do know that he's pretty good in wet weather. It made me feel good for him, for his team. I think he really did deserve that after a long couple of rough weeks for him. I'm sure that couldn't have been easy. I think this will definitely put a damper on some people's insensitive thoughts that they might have towards him. The second person that I wanted to mention is Alex Albon. Again, another driver that a lot of people have been saying things about, but I think he did pretty well this weekend, starting with the free practices and the qualifying. I mean, he was up at the top. He did take his highest ever starting position on the grid for this race, and he even led a couple of laps. I think it was the first time in his career he had ever done so, and he's also the first Thai driver to do so. I thought that was worth highlighting. As we know, that Red Bull seat has not been confirmed yet, but something tells me that they're probably going to retain him just because they haven't said anything about it lately, and the fact that he is talented, he does have a lot to give. That car can be really hard to drive, but he did prove this weekend that he's up for the challenge, and I think this could perhaps go a really long way for him. Okay, so there were several unfortunate incidents in this race, at least not unsafe. I'm thankful for that, but definitely, come on, really type of incidents. So Lando Norris received a 5-place grid penalty during the qualifying for unintentionally setting the fastest lap during the double waved yellow flags. So Kevin Magnussen abandoned his lap, and then he was upset that several of the other drivers didn't pay attention to that, so he took it up with the stewards, said, hey, you know, we need new rules for how you guys are doing this because this clearly isn't effective. I think the most strange part about all of this is that Norris was the only person who received this penalty for that particular incident. To Magnussen's point, I do think that they could do something about perhaps dealing with these issues as they come about instead of waiting to deal with it. It was even more unfortunate for Lando's teammate, Carlos Sainz when he held up Sergio Perez during qualifying, which resulted in a 3-place grid penalty for him. But they did finish with points by the end of the race, so I think that turned around pretty quick. Third person I want to talk about is George Russell. So George Russell was already due to start this race from the back of the grid because he had exceeded the amount of times he could make upgrades to his power unit, but he also received an extra 5-place grid penalty as well for the same reason as Norris, but for a different incident. So Norris's was for Latifi, I think. George Russell was for Kvyat. So this incident was really strange and came about after a long time, but it was revealed that Gasly would be receiving a penalty because of a breach of parc ferme rules. Sorry. Honda team wanted to change his power unit elements after parc ferme. This would have already resulted in a back of the grid penalty, but the team disassembled the car and then decided, okay, we don't want to go through with this anymore. But the stewards still weren't convinced and said, hey, you already started working on the car. This might as well just be more of a strategic play than just physical. So we're gonna give you guys a penalty anyway. And that's unfortunate because the drivers sometimes don't deserve these things. It's not like they're intentionally there. Like, I don't think Pierre Gasly was there overnight, like, frantically disassembling the car. So the last person I want to talk about before this video closes off is Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen started off fairly okay, but Max Verstappen had a little bit of, I guess I just want to say he was a little bit impatient with how the race played out. It started off maybe with a little bit of bad luck. So it started off with Max starting on, I believe, the wrong gear. He was in gear 1 when gear 2 would have probably worked out better for him. The car didn't get enough revs to really start, and that could also be combined with cold temperatures. If you watch the restart again, you can see him not take off when everybody else is already off. And then he has like a late start and pushes, but by then Sergio Perez is already P2. You already have Vettel up in the front, so that was not a good move for him. He also did have an issue with the pit lane exit and the white line. Steward said that they were going to be looking at it. They did. They didn't find any sort of penalty, but that was an issue. And then he had 2 extra incidents where he lost both time and speed. So he was trailing right behind Sergio, and I think he thought he could overtake Perez from the inside line, but he was caught up behind the rear wing of Perez, and he does avoid the barriers, but he ends up sliding, and the spray from Perez's car also, I think, threw him off. The second time is when he had a spin trying to avoid one of the Alphas, which again cost him more time and speed. So hopefully it works out in Bahrain. There were 4 DNFs: Latifi, Grosjean, Magnussen, and Giovinazzi. Magnussen had like a really weird issue where he had a pit stop and then like he stopped 2 seconds later because there was an issue with one of the tires, alluding to the point that maybe the pit stop wasn't done correctly. You should probably at this point just be looking out at the constructors standings because Racing Point is now ahead of McLaren and Renault. Do I think McLaren and Renault still have a chance to overtake Racing Point? Sure. Do I think that they are? Not particularly. I just feel like it's because both of those teams had a couple of mechanical issues that have been hard to put aside. I mean, Sainz had a mechanical issue on Saturday or Friday, I don't remember. It's a lot easier to think, at least, that Racing Point might have this in the bag, as Lance Stroll said that one time. Yeah, guys, that was it for Istanbul. Thanks for watching. If you'd like more content, I write on Drive Tribe. I dropped a takeaways from the Turkish GP qualifying yesterday. I am on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you guys next time. Or not. So.